It was supposed to be an ordinary Tuesday night at Ridgeway University, the kind of quiet evening when most students were either buried in textbooks or winding down after late classes. The fall air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain and the distant hum of the city beyond the campus gates. Streetlights shimmered across puddles from an earlier drizzle, painting the sidewalks in shades of amber and silver. Among the few students still out that night was Lena Morris, a 21-year-old junior majoring in psychology. Friends described her as bright, grounded, the type who never went anywhere without her notebook or her cup of black coffee. She lived in Hawthorne Hall, one of the older dorms tucked near the edge of campus, just a 5-minute walk from the student library. At 11:42 p.m., security cameras captured Lena crossing the courtyard alone. She was wearing a gray hoodie and jeans, her backpack slung over one shoulder. The footage shows her glancing briefly at her phone before disappearing into the dorm entrance. That was the last confirmed sighting of her. The next morning, Lena's roommate, Sarah Klein, woke up to find her bed untouched. The light above Lena's desk was still on, her phone charger plugged into the wall, and her wallet resting neatly beside her keys. There were no signs of struggle, no noise, no commotion. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. At first, no one panicked. Students often stayed over with friends or pulled all-nighters at the library. But when Lena missed her morning class, then her work shift at the campus cafe, concern began to spread. By evening, flyers with her photo were already pinned to bulletin boards across campus. The university police began their routine check, reviewing security footage, interviewing friends, retracing her last known steps. Everything pointed to one simple fact. Lena had entered Hawthorne Hall that night, but she had never left. Some students started whispering about strange things happening in that dorm. Lights flickering, footsteps in empty hallways, doors that opened on their own. Others dismissed it as fear feeding imagination. Still, an unspoken unease began to settle over Ridgeway. Outside, rain began to fall again, softly at first, then heavier, drumming against the old dorm windows. From the outside, Hawthorne Hall stood silent, its tall, narrow windows glowing faintly in the dark. A building that now held a secret no one could yet understand. And as night fell once more over Ridgeway University, one question echoed through every corridor and every whispered conversation. Where did Lena Morris go? The morning after Lena's disappearance unfolded like a slow, creeping nightmare. What began as confusion quickly turned into dread. By the time the sun rose over Ridgeway University, the quiet campus had already started to hum with anxious energy. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some said Lena had gone home unexpectedly. Others whispered about an argument with her boyfriend. But no one knew anything for sure. Her roommate Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, staring at Lena's untouched belongings. The phone charger still hung loose from the socket. A coffee mug, half filled and cold, stood on the desk. Even Lena's planner lay open to Tuesday, the words "Study Group, 9:30 p.m." circled neatly in blue ink. It looked as if she could walk back in at any moment, but she didn't. By noon, campus security had already reviewed every second of the dorm's surveillance footage. The last frame showed Lena stepping into the building, timestamp 11:42 p.m., and then nothing. No one saw her leave. No camera caught her exiting through any door. Every window was sealed shut. It made no sense. At 2:15 p.m., the university notified the Ridgeway Police Department. Detective Aaron Keller, a methodical man in his late 30s, arrived on campus with his partner, Maria Torres. They began the investigation quietly, hoping to avoid a panic. They questioned Sarah first. She didn't have plans to go anywhere, Sarah said, her voice trembling. She was just going to study a bit and sleep. She didn't even take her phone. Did she seem upset, distracted? Keller asked. No, not at all. She was fine, normal. That word, normal, would echo through the interviews that followed. Everyone said the same thing. Lena wasn't the type to disappear. By evening, word of her disappearance had reached the media. News vans lined the university's main gate, and students gathered in small groups, their faces lit by the glow of phone screens showing Lena's picture. Her parents, Michael and Rebecca Morris, arrived that night exhausted and pale from the drive. Rebecca's voice broke as she spoke to the reporters. "My daughter didn't just run away. Please, if anyone saw her, anything, please tell us." Inside Hawthorne Hall, detectives searched Lena's room inch by inch. They found no signs of forced entry, no blood, no struggle. Her clothes were folded neatly in the closet, laptop on the desk, backpack against the wall. But one thing caught Keller's eye, a notebook lying open, a half-finished line scrawled in hurried handwriting. "I keep hearing it again, that sound behind the..." The sentence ended there, the pen still pressed into the paper, leaving a small dot of dried ink. Keller frowned. "Sarah, do you know what this means?" She shook her head. She never mentioned anything like that. Outside, the storm had grown worse. Rain lashed against the dorm windows, and thunder rolled across the hills. It was as if the weather itself mirrored the growing unease on campus. Students began locking their doors at night. A few even requested transfers out of Hawthorne Hall. The search expanded beyond campus, into the surrounding woods, nearby roads, even storm drains. Dozens of volunteers joined, combing through the wet, muddy fields with flashlights and raincoats. They found nothing. No footprints, no clothing, not even a clue. Late that night, Keller stood under an umbrella near the dorm entrance, staring at the glowing sign that read Hawthorne Hall. The rain dripped from his coat, and fatigue etched deep lines into his face. "She walked in," he murmured, "and never walked out. That doesn't happen." Torres exhaled, crossing her arms. "Unless someone made sure it didn't." The detective glanced at the dark windows above. Somewhere up there was Lena's room, silent, untouched, waiting for answers that refused to come. For the first time, Ridgeway University felt different. The laughter in the courtyards, the music from dorm rooms, even the usual late-night chatter. All of it seemed to fade into uneasy quiet. Everyone began watching each other a little more closely, wondering if they'd seen something, or someone, that they shouldn't have. And deep inside Hawthorne Hall, in that long, dimly lit corridor where Lena was last seen, the air seemed colder than anywhere else on campus. By the third day, fear had settled over Ridgeway like a heavy fog. Hawthorne Hall, once just another aging dorm with flickering lights and creaky floors, now felt like the center of something wrong, something no one could name. Students avoided walking its hallways alone, and every time a door creaked or a floorboard groaned, someone flinched. Detective Keller and his team had turned one of the study lounges into a temporary command post. Maps of the building covered the walls, with Lena's dorms circled in red. They traced every possible exit, every window, every camera angle. Yet no matter how they looked at it, there was no explanation. The building was locked at midnight. Cameras covered both entrances, no blind spots, no sign of Lena ever leaving. Sarah, still pale and shaken, hadn't been able to sleep since that night. She started hearing things, faint footsteps in the hallway when no one was there, a door closing softly down the corridor. Once, at nearly 2 a.m., she swore she heard someone whisper her name. When she opened the door, the hall was empty. Word spread quickly. Students on the third floor began reporting strange occurrences, lights flickering, doors that unlocked themselves, whispers through vents. The maintenance crew blamed faulty wiring, but the unease grew anyway. Detective Torres began interviewing the dorm residents one by one. A first-year student, trembling as she spoke, said she'd seen a shadow moving in the stairwell the night Lena vanished, but when she looked again, it was gone. Another claimed she heard a muffled sound, like someone knocking from inside a wall. Keller didn't believe in ghosts. He'd been on the force long enough to know that fear could twist perceptions. Still, something about this case felt different. Rational explanations didn't fit. One afternoon, a janitor approached the detectives with a nervous look. "I didn't want to say anything before," he muttered, "but that basement, something's off down there. The lights keep dying, and there's this smell, like damp concrete and something else." The detectives followed him down. The basement of Hawthorne Hall was a maze of old storage rooms and boiler pipes built decades before the rest of the dorm. It smelled of rust and dust. As they moved deeper, Keller's flashlight beam flickered across old furniture, broken lamps, and forgotten boxes. Then they found it, a locked metal door at the far end, covered in peeling paint. The janitor swore he'd never seen it open. "It's not on the blueprints," Torres noted quietly, tracing her fingers over the cold handle. When Keller pried the door open, it groaned like something alive. Inside was a small, windowless room, bare concrete walls, a single chair, and in the corner a dusty old mirror leaning against the wall. The air was colder here, much colder. Torres shined her light across the floor and froze. There, in the thin layer of dust, were faint footprints, small, barefoot prints, leading toward the mirror and stopping right in front of it. No prints led away. "Could she have been here?" Torres whispered. Keller didn't answer. He just stared at the mirror. Its surface reflected the flashlight beam weakly, warped by years of grime. But for a moment, just a moment, he thought he saw something move in it. A shadow, faint but unmistakable. He blinked. It was gone. They sealed the room and ordered a full forensic sweep. But that night, long after the investigators left, the janitor swore he heard a faint tapping echoing from behind that same door. Slow, deliberate, like knuckles on glass. Back upstairs, Sarah sat on her bed, unable to shake the feeling that someone was watching her. The air in the dorm felt heavy, suffocating. Her eyes drifted toward Lena's desk, where the open notebook still lay. That last unfinished line staring back at her. "I keep hearing it again. That sound behind the—" Sarah closed the notebook, heart pounding. Whatever Lena had heard, she was starting to hear it too. Outside, the campus was silent except for the wind moving through the trees. Inside Hawthorne Hall, somewhere deep in the walls, something stirred. By the end of the week, Hawthorne Hall felt like a different world. The hallways were quieter, the air heavier. Most students had packed bags and begged the housing office to move them to other dorms. But some, like Sarah, refused to leave. She said she wanted answers. Others whispered that she simply couldn't leave her roommate behind. Detective Keller was growing frustrated. Every lead turned cold within hours. Forensics had found no trace of Lena in the mysterious basement room. No fingerprints, no DNA. Nothing but those strange barefoot prints that ended at the mirror. The mirror itself had been removed for testing, though Keller couldn't help but notice something unnerving. When the mirror was lifted off the wall, the dust outline beneath it looked like a faint, human silhouette. That night, a storm rolled across Ridgeway. Wind howled through the courtyard, rattling windows and bending the trees. Inside the dorm, lights flickered, and thunder rolled overhead like the growl of something ancient. Sarah sat on her bed, unable to focus on anything but the creaks and murmurs of the old building. Her phone buzzed, a message from Eli, a friend from her psychology class who lived down the hall. "Can't sleep either. Feels weird tonight. Meet in the lounge." Relieved not to be alone, she grabbed her sweater and stepped into the hall. The fluorescent lights flickered, then dimmed. Somewhere below, a door slammed. Once, then again. She hesitated but forced herself forward. When she reached the lounge, Eli was pacing near the window. He looked uneasy. "I heard something downstairs," he said quietly. "Like voices. But no one's supposed to be down there." Sarah frowned. You mean the basement? He nodded. They stared at each other for a moment, both knowing they shouldn't go. And yet, curiosity, or something darker, pulled them toward the stairwell. The basement was colder than before. Their footsteps echoed softly as they moved past the storage rooms. A single emergency light glowed red at the end of the corridor where the sealed metal door had once been. Except now, it was open. The lock lay on the floor, broken clean through. "Someone's been here," Eli whispered. Inside, the mirror was gone, the space where it once stood now empty, the walls damp and dark. The faint smell of metal hung in the air. On the floor, Sarah noticed something half buried in dust, a small silver earring. Her breath caught. It was Lena's. Before she could speak, the light above them flickered violently and went out. The corridor plunged into darkness. "Eli?" she whispered. No answer. She turned, her phone flashlight trembling in her hand, and saw the faint outline of someone standing at the far end of the hallway. It looked like Eli, but he wasn't moving. His posture was wrong, stiff, his head tilted slightly as if listening. "Eli?" she said again. The figure twitched, then slowly it stepped back, disappearing into the shadows. Sarah ran forward, heart hammering, but when she reached the spot, no one was there. Only wet footprints trailed across the floor, leading not away but toward the sealed room. And then came the sound, a faint tapping, just like the janitor had described. Tap, tap, tap. It echoed through the corridor, growing faster, louder, until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. The pipes, the walls, the very air around her. Sarah screamed and bolted up the stairs. By the time she reached the ground floor, the lights had returned. Steady, silent, as if nothing had happened. She burst into Eli's room, but he wasn't there. His phone lay on the bed, flashlight still on, buzzing with a half-written message. "She's here." That was the last anyone saw of Eli. 2 disappearances. Same dorm, same mirror. Detective Keller arrived minutes later, drenched from the storm. When he reached the basement, the door was sealed again, this time from the inside. And down in that darkness, beneath the sound of dripping water and humming pipes, something moved, slowly, patiently, waiting for the next one to come looking. The storm that night was one of the worst Ridgeway had seen in years. Trees cracked in the wind, power lines sparked, and by morning, half the campus was without electricity. When the rain finally stopped, the air felt unnaturally still, as if the storm had taken more than just branches and debris with it. Sarah never showed up to her morning lecture. Neither did Eli. Their classmates assumed they were together, maybe holed up in one of the dorm rooms waiting out the storm. But by noon, word began to spread. No one had seen them since last night. Detective Keller arrived back at Hawthorne Hall just after 2 p.m. The building reeked of damp carpet and ozone. Students huddled in corners, whispering, afraid to go anywhere alone. The dorm's resident advisor was pale, trembling, insisting that something's wrong with this place. When Keller reached the basement, the air was colder than before, heavy, metallic. The sealed door was locked once again, the new bolt intact. But when the forensic team dusted the handle for prints, they found dozens, some smudged, others clear, all belonging to Sarah Klein and Eli Turner. It made no sense. Security footage showed neither of them ever leaving the dorm. By evening, search efforts began. Officers scoured the campus grounds, checked the river behind the library, even brought in dogs. The canines picked up Sarah's scent near the basement entrance, followed it halfway across the courtyard, and then it simply vanished. No trail, no direction, nothing. The university issued a formal statement calling the situation deeply concerning. Parents arrived on campus demanding answers. Reporters camped outside the main gates, their microphones dripping with rainwater. But no one, not even Keller, could explain what was happening inside that old building. That night, a small group of students gathered in the lounge, refusing to sleep. One of them, a freshman named Holly, said she'd heard something through the air vents the night before. "Voices," she whispered. "Two of them. A girl and a guy. They sounded like they were calling for help." Everyone stared at her, too afraid to ask what she meant, but then she added, almost in a whisper, "It was coming from the basement." At dawn, the rain returned, softer this time but steady. Police expanded their search to the woods beyond the athletic field. They found footprints, 2 sets, leading down a muddy trail. They followed them for nearly half a mile until the tracks ended abruptly at a small clearing. The mud was disturbed, as if something heavy had been dragged. And then nothing. The forest was silent. Keller stood there for a long moment, his coat soaked, eyes scanning the tree line. "We're missing something," he muttered. Back at the dorm, a maintenance worker vacuuming the hallway outside Sarah's room noticed something strange. Beneath the door, just a thin line, barely visible, seeped a faint trickle of water. He knocked. No answer. Assuming a leak, he unlocked the door. Inside, the room was cold. The curtains fluttered, though the window was shut. Sarah's belongings were untouched, her books stacked neatly, her clothes folded on the chair. But on the desk, next to a half-finished cup of coffee, lay something that shouldn't have been there. A single silver earring, identical to the one found in the basement. And beside it, scratched faintly into the wood of the desk, were 4 words. "She's not alone down there." The worker stumbled back, calling for security. When Keller arrived minutes later, the earring was still there. But the words, the carving, were gone. The wood was smooth, untouched, as if it had never been written on at all. Outside, thunder rolled again in the distance. Students began packing up their things, abandoning the dorm in groups. By nightfall, Hawthorne Hall stood nearly empty, just a few flickering lights in its windows, and the sound of rain against the glass. From that day on, no one ever saw Sarah Klein or Eli Turner again. And in the days that followed, even those who stayed behind began to whisper that the storm hadn't ended that night. It had just moved inside. By morning, the campus had transformed into a scene of controlled chaos. Police cars lined the streets outside Hawthorne Hall, their lights flashing intermittently through the mist of the early hour. Campus security worked in tandem with local law enforcement, trying to piece together the events of the stormy night that had claimed Sarah Klein and Eli Turner. Detective Keller oversaw the search efforts personally. He had brought in the department's finest, forensic specialists, K-9 units, and even a drone team to survey the campus grounds from above. Every hallway, classroom, and stairwell in Hawthorne Hall was swept for evidence. Nothing was overlooked. Initial reports were frustrating. Security footage only confirmed the last moments the students were seen. Sarah leaving her room to meet Eli in the hallway, the flickering lights in the basement corridor, and then nothing. There were no images of them leaving the building, no sign of struggle. Only the faint hum of electrical wiring and the echo of the storm remained. K-9 units were deployed to trace the students' scent. The dogs, usually reliable, faltered near the basement entrance. They followed Sarah's trail down the hall and through the carpeted stairwell, but when they approached the service door that led outside, they stopped abruptly, barking and growling at the air. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. The dogs had never failed like this before. Meanwhile, inside the dorm, forensic teams combed the basement for clues. They found the silver earring, the same type Sarah had been wearing the night before, partially hidden beneath the wet floorboards near the former mirror location. There were footprints, too, Eli's sneakers, Sarah's flats, leading into the basement, circling the spot where the mirror once stood, then disappearing. No traces led to the outside world. The prints seemed almost deliberate, as if someone had walked invisibly beyond their reach. Keller examined the mirror frame carefully. Strange symbols had been etched along the wooden edges, barely noticeable at first glance, angular lines forming patterns that seemed wrong. He had never seen anything like it. No language, no code, nothing that could be deciphered. Just shapes that looked almost ritualistic. Interviews began with dorm residents. Students described hearing strange noises, tapping, whispering, the creaking of furniture in empty rooms. Several mentioned seeing fleeting shadows in the hallways, but no one wanted to go on record. Fear made even the most rational students second-guess themselves. One of them, a freshman named Holly, swore she had seen a figure standing silently at the end of the hallway, watching her from the darkness before vanishing. Keller noted every detail, but evidence was scarce. The investigation extended beyond Hawthorne Hall. Canvassing the surrounding campus, detectives questioned groundskeepers, maintenance staff, and night janitors. The old campus map revealed a series of service tunnels beneath the dorms, narrow corridors used for plumbing and electrical access. Keller ordered a full inspection. Inside, the tunnels were damp, smelling of mold and rust. Footprints were found, but they seemed incomplete. Marks that appeared at one section suddenly disappeared, as if whoever walked there had been lifted off the ground entirely. By the third day, public interest had grown. Students organized candlelight vigils outside the dorm, hoping to draw attention to the missing pair. Parents demanded answers. Local media reported every minute development, but the truth eluded them. Keller spoke to reporters carefully, emphasizing that no evidence suggested foul play. Yet the oddities piled up: footprints that disappeared, symbols that made no sense, voices that weren't there. Late that night, Keller returned to the basement. Alone, he retraced the steps Sarah and Eli had taken. His flashlight flickered, illuminating damp walls, water-stained floorboards, and the spot where the mirror had once hung. He paused at the corner, noticing a faint groove in the concrete, a drag mark. It led beneath a heavy panel that concealed a maintenance hatch. With effort, Keller lifted it. The space beneath was dark, cramped, and smelled of earth. Nothing inside but a few scattered leaves and water puddles. Yet Keller felt a chill, as if unseen eyes were watching. Over the following weeks, Keller's team explored every angle. Drones mapped the campus grounds, thermal cameras monitored the hallways overnight, and volunteers combed nearby forests and streams. Still, no sign of Sarah or Eli was found. The only tangible clues remained the silver earring, the cryptic symbols, and the traces in the basement. Gradually, the investigation became a source of speculation and fear. Students avoided Hawthorne Hall. Faculty debated temporary closures. Parents petitioned the university to conduct a full review of campus safety. But despite the effort, the mystery deepened. Keller, normally composed, found himself doubting what was real and what might be imagined. The evidence refused to fit any logical narrative: footprints that disappeared, objects that reappeared in different places, sounds with no source. Finally, the case was classified as active but unresolved. Detectives continued patrols, checks, and follow-ups, but as weeks became months, the trail went cold. Sarah Klein and Eli Turner had vanished into thin air. The campus settled back into routine, but an unease lingered. Hallways echoed differently, shadows seemed to stretch longer, and students whispered that Hawthorne Hall was haunted. The investigation was meticulous, methodical, and professional. But for everyone involved, there was a haunting truth. No matter how thorough the search, some mysteries refused to yield. Sarah and Eli were gone, and the building that had once been ordinary now held a secret that nobody could explain. By the time the third week had passed, Hawthorne Hall had become a whispering ground. The absence of Sarah Klein and Eli Turner had transformed from a campus crisis into a source of stories. Some rational, most not. Students spoke in hushed tones as they passed the dormitory corridors, casting nervous glances at doors and shadows that seemed to move on their own. The building that had once been mundane now pulsed with an invisible tension, as if the walls themselves remembered what had transpired. The first wave of rumors was practical. They ran off together, students would say. Maybe they got scared during the storm. Some speculated about arguments, clandestine relationships, even personal family issues that might have driven them to disappear. These explanations were whispered by those unwilling to believe in something more sinister, yet even the most rational students admitted the irregularities made no sense. How could two people vanish without leaving footprints, bypassing cameras and locked doors? Then came the stories that couldn't be explained logically. One student claimed to see a pale figure standing at the end of the hallway at night, staring silently at passing students. Another insisted that doors slammed shut on their own, even when the storm had ended. The library was not immune to these tales. Books left open on desks, pages fluttering as if caught in an invisible breeze. Some said they could hear faint whispers echoing through the vents late at night. Voices that were neither Sarah's nor Eli's, but pleading, fearful, and cold. As weeks turned into months, the legend grew. Sophomores told first years about a shadow that roamed the basement of Hawthorne Hall. If you hear it whisper your name, don't answer, one warned. You might not come back. The story spread beyond the dormitory, spilling into student lounges and lecture halls. Even faculty members found themselves discussing oddities, lights flickering, unexplained chills, an uneasy feeling in the basement corridor. Some dismissed it as paranoia fueled by fear, but a quiet, unshakable dread lingered over the campus. The media amplified the mystery. Local news aired segments on the vanished students, interviews with their parents, and recounts from classmates. One television feature focused on the students who had seen strange shadows or heard whispers. National outlets picked up the story, highlighting the unusual circumstances. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, and the eerie disappearance of two young lives without trace. Internet forums and social media exploded with speculation. Paranormal enthusiasts and amateur sleuths began visiting the campus, mapping the dorm, and dissecting each detail of security footage. Videos circulated online, grainy, often misleading, but enough to keep the legend alive. Alongside the rumors, another layer emerged, theories of supernatural involvement. Students whispered about a possible curse on the building, some citing the old construction of Hawthorne Hall, its labyrinthine tunnels, and the unsettling placement of rooms and staircases. Others speculated that Eli and Sarah had fallen victim to a spirit, a malevolent presence lingering in the dorm since its original construction decades earlier. There were hushed stories of previous students who had vanished, always during storms, always in the basement area, though no records confirmed these claims. The stories merged with local folklore, giving the campus its own haunted history. Yet, not all explanations leaned toward the mystical. A rational thread persisted, driven by those unwilling to accept paranormal forces. Some believed that an intruder, someone aware of the dorm's weaknesses, might have taken advantage of the storm. Others suggested an elaborate prank or experiment gone wrong, though neither argument had evidence to support it. Still, every attempt to explain the disappearances logically collided with the unnerving physical evidence. Footprints that ended abruptly, the silver earring, and the carved words in the basement. The gap between fact and speculation only widened. Parents became increasingly vocal. Candlelight vigils were held each week, commemorating Sarah and Eli. Friends and roommates lit candles, shared memories, and prayed for a resolution. Even as rational explanations circulated, a communal sense of fear had settled over the campus. Students avoided the basement and certain wings of the building, afraid to walk alone after dark. Late-night study sessions dwindled. Once busy lounges remained empty. Hawthorne Hall had become a place of silent dread, where every creak, every flicker of light hinted at the unknown. In the months following the disappearances, the campus's social fabric shifted. Students whispered behind closed doors, passing along fragments of stories. A face glimpsed in the window, a door that slammed without wind, a shadow moving across an empty hallway. Some spoke in wonder, some in terror, but all were captivated by the mystery. The tales were retold and reshaped with every telling, giving rise to a legend that transcended the rational mind. And amidst the speculation and fear, a haunting realization persisted. Nobody knew what had truly happened that night. The more people talked, the more the mystery grew, leaving students, faculty, and law enforcement alike in a liminal space between disbelief and dread. Hawthorne Hall, once ordinary, had become a focal point for a story that blurred the lines between reality and legend. The vanished students were no longer merely missing. They were becoming myth. And as stories circulated, one thing remained certain: the campus would never feel the same again. It had been nearly 3 years since the disappearance of Sarah Klein and Eli Turner from Hawthorne Hall. The campus had moved on, classes continued, students graduated, and new arrivals filled the dormitory halls. Yet the void left by their sudden vanishing lingered, an unspoken weight among those who had known them. Most had come to accept that answers might never arrive, that the mystery was destined to remain a haunting story whispered late at night. But one cold November morning, a maintenance crew working in the basement stumbled upon something that would reignite the campus's collective fear. Behind a false wall that had been recently exposed during renovations, they found a small, dust-covered space, a hidden alcove that had gone unnoticed for decades. Inside lay a collection of items that sent chills through anyone who saw them. A backpack, half-burned notebooks, a few pieces of clothing unmistakably belonging to Sarah and Eli. The smell of decay lingered faintly, a reminder that these items had not merely been stored, but abandoned under mysterious circumstances. Campus security was immediately alerted, and the university called in local law enforcement. Detectives combed through the alcove with meticulous care, photographing every detail and cataloging each piece of evidence. Fingerprints were dusted, fabric was tested for DNA, and the notebooks were carefully unrolled. Inside the pages, half-erased notes and sketches hinted at something far darker than anyone had imagined. There were crude diagrams of the dormitory layout, cryptic symbols, and repeated references to watching and waiting. The handwriting alternated between two distinct styles, one neat and controlled, the other jagged, as though written in fear or haste. When news of the discovery spread, students and faculty alike felt a mixture of horror and disbelief. The stories that had once been considered rumor or legend now had tangible proof behind them. Sarah and Eli had not merely vanished into thin air. Something, or someone, had intentionally concealed evidence of their presence, and the alcove suggested that they might have been watched, held, or forced into hiding within the very walls of the dormitory they had trusted. The campus became a flurry of activity. Police helicopters hovered over the building, canine units searched every inch of the property, and detectives expanded the investigation into the surrounding areas. Journalists flocked to cover the story, capturing the reactions of students who had grown up with the legend. Many admitted to feeling a chill as they passed the basement corridors, recalling shadows they had once dismissed as imagination. The legend had suddenly returned to reality, darker and more sinister than before. Forensic experts examined the clothing and backpacks, confirming the presence of biological material consistent with long-term exposure to moisture and decay. The notebooks revealed coded messages, partially deciphered references to the dormitory's construction, hidden passages, and mysterious watchers that may have been observing the students for weeks, if not months, before their disappearance. There was a pattern, a deliberate plan hinted at in every line, yet no one could determine the identity of the perpetrator. Parents of Sarah and Eli were brought in to view the items. The sight of their children's possessions, a scarf Sarah had worn, a sketchbook filled with drawings of the campus, Eli's worn sneakers, shattered whatever fragile hope they had maintained over the years. Yet alongside grief came a renewed determination to uncover the truth. Law enforcement vowed to leave no stone unturned, opening cold cases, re-interviewing former students, and reviewing every piece of footage from the original disappearance. The discovery also sparked renewed interest among students. Campus tours became irregularly paused, with students reporting a sense of unease in the basement and hallway areas. Some claimed to hear soft footsteps echoing when no one was present. Others reported feeling eyes on them as they walked past the concealed alcove. Stories that had been relegated to whispers in dorm lounges now had a tangible anchor, a physical space tied to the missing students' final days. Despite the evidence, many questions remained unanswered. Who had created the hidden alcove? How had they gone unnoticed for decades? And most chillingly, if Sarah and Eli had been discovered there, why had no one survived to recount the events? The pattern of secrecy and fear hinted at a mastermind operating far beyond a random act. Someone meticulous, calculating, and terrifyingly patient. Detective Harris, who had initially investigated the disappearance years before, returned to the scene. He stood silently in the alcove, examining the half-burned notebook. This is not just an accident," he muttered under his breath. "Someone intended for them to disappear, and they succeeded, and they planned it meticulously." His words sent a ripple through the team, the gravity of the realization settling like a weight over the basement. As the investigation deepened, the campus held its collective breath. Students avoided the basement, faculty restricted access, and the stories circulating among the new generation were tinged with genuine fear rather than myth. For the first time, the legend of Hawthorne Hall intersected with cold, undeniable reality. And as detectives pieced together the fragments of the past, one thing became painfully clear. The answers would be darker than anyone could have imagined. The hidden alcove, the items, the symbols. It was no longer a question of if they would find the truth. It was only a question of how far the darkness extended within the walls of Hawthorne Hall. And in that quiet basement, among dust and shadows, the long-buried secrets of that fateful night were finally beginning to stir. The hidden alcove had thrown the entire investigation into a whirlwind. Detectives and forensic experts combed through the notebooks, symbols, and the clothing found behind the false wall. Slowly, painstakingly, a reconstruction of that night began to take shape, fragment by fragment, clue by clue. Sarah Klein had returned from her evening at the campus library just as she always did. Security footage confirmed her walking into Hawthorne Hall at exactly 10:27 p.m., a backpack slung over her shoulder, earbuds in, humming softly to herself. Eli Turner, visiting a friend in a neighboring dorm, had been captured entering his building around the same time. From there, the trail went cold, or so it had seemed for years. The notebooks revealed subtle details previously unnoticed, diagrams of stairwells, hallway intersections, and a series of arrows pointing toward the maintenance basement. Crude symbols, circles intertwined with lines, seemed to indicate observation points, places where someone could hide and watch without being seen. Handwriting alternated between neat, calculated letters and frantic, jagged strokes, suggesting two people, one plotting, the other under duress. Interviews with students who had been present that night, combined with forensic timelines, suggested that Sarah had noticed something unusual on her way back to the dorm. She had glanced down a dimly lit corridor, perhaps spotting a shadow or hearing an unexplained noise. Her instinct to dismiss it as imagination was evident in the security footage. A slight pause, a shift of weight, and then onward. But those seconds, those tiny hesitations, may have been the difference between safety and disaster. Eli's movements were harder to reconstruct. Witnesses reported hearing a muffled voice echoing down the hallway near his dorm, a voice that did not belong to any student. He had texted his roommate around 10:45 p.m. "Heading back. Be there soon." And that was the last message sent from his phone. Forensic analysis of his clothing found in the alcove suggested he had struggled, the fabric bearing faint traces of blood and soil, consistent with being dragged or concealed against his will. Detectives hypothesized a confrontation in the basement. Perhaps the perpetrator had lured Sarah and Eli separately, using a pretense of help or guidance, exploiting the labyrinthine corridors of the old dormitories. The alcove's positioning suggested meticulous planning, a hiding place within walls, unseen from cameras, providing a vantage point to monitor movements without detection. Students' recollections added a chilling layer. A former resident of Hawthorne Hall reported hearing a faint, rhythmic tapping that night, like someone counting steps in the shadows. Another mentioned a whisper that seemed to drift from the basement vents. "Wait here. Don't move." At first, these were dismissed as dormitory myths, sleep-deprived hallucinations, or overactive imaginations. But the alcove now proved that the sounds had likely been real. The whispers, the tapping, the methodical steps of someone orchestrating the disappearance. The recovered notebooks also hinted at the psychological manipulation used against the victims. Repeated phrases like, "Follow the light," "Trust the walls," and "You are chosen" were scrawled across the pages. Experts suggested that whoever had planned this knew how to exploit the students' routines and trust in familiar spaces. It wasn't merely an abduction. It was a meticulous psychological game designed to confuse, frighten, and control. As detectives pieced together the movements, it became evident that Sarah and Eli had not acted recklessly. Every step they took was calculated, yet the predator's knowledge of the building, hidden passages, and blind spots had outmaneuvered them. A sudden flash of light from the basement, likely a motion sensor or a deliberately placed illumination, had disoriented them. Small, deliberate sounds, a cough, a scraping of boots, had created the illusion of other students' presence. By the time they reached the false wall, it had already been prepared to conceal them, erasing any trace of their struggle from the hallways above. The reconstruction also uncovered subtle contradictions in prior witness accounts. Some claimed the lights in certain corridors flickered unusually that night, while others noted a faint metallic scent that dissipated quickly. Forensic testing suggested traces of chemical agents consistent with smoke or mild sedatives, enough to confuse, perhaps incapacitate, but not permanently harm immediately. The perpetrator's intent seemed clear: to remove them from sight entirely, leaving no immediate evidence behind. Family members of Sarah and Eli, finally seeing the reconstructed events, were devastated, but also partially relieved. The horror of understanding the method behind the madness, the premeditation, the stalking, the manipulation, clarified that this was not random. Someone had watched, studied, and executed a plan with precision. And while the victim's fate remained uncertain, the knowledge offered a grim closure. They had not vanished by chance, nor had they wandered into danger unknowingly. Detective Harris summarized the reconstruction to the press. "The events of that night were orchestrated. We are piecing together every movement, every interaction. It's painstaking, but this is how we honor the missing. By understanding what happened, we prevent it from happening again." Yet, even with this clarity, the darkest questions remained. Who had planned it? Where were Sarah and Eli now? And why? The answers had eluded investigators for years, and while the reconstruction provided an unprecedented glimpse into the events of that night, it also deepened the mystery, revealing a predator methodical, patient, and terrifyingly cunning. As the campus held its breath, the shadows of Hawthorne Hall seemed to linger longer, whispering untold secrets, and the reconstructed events only reminded everyone that some darkness could not be fully illuminated. It could only be traced, piece by piece, through fragments left behind. And still the alcove sat hidden behind the false wall, a silent witness to the horrors of that night, waiting for the day the final answers might emerge. Months of investigations, interviews, and painstaking forensic work had culminated in a picture that was as incomplete as it was terrifying. Sarah Klein and Eli Turner remained missing, their fates a shadow over the entire campus. Hawthorne Hall, once a familiar sanctuary for students, had become a symbol of fear, suspicion, and mystery. Every hallway echoed with the question no one could answer. Why them? The university administration held multiple press conferences, expressing regret and outlining safety measures. But no announcement could undo the trauma. Parents demanded answers. Students shared whispered conversations in dorm lounges, their eyes darting toward darkened hallways. Campus security installed additional cameras, emergency call boxes, and stricter access protocols, yet the absence of closure gnawed at everyone. Detective Harris summarized the case in a confidential report. The evidence points to a highly calculated abduction. The victims were observed, manipulated, and ultimately taken through methods designed to leave almost no trace. Despite extensive efforts, the exact whereabouts of Sarah and Eli are unknown. Every lead has been followed, yet some answers remain beyond reach. Family members, desperate for closure, gathered for a candlelight vigil in the campus quad. Sarah's mother, Rebecca Klein, held her daughter's sketchbook close, its pages filled with doodles and notes from countless late-night studying. Eli's father, Martin Turner, carried the small stuffed toy his son had taken to the dorm that evening, a symbol of innocence snatched away. Both families spoke softly, recounting memories, celebrating achievements, and honoring the lives that had vanished without warning. Tears mixed with whispers. "We will never forget you." Amid the grief, students found their own ways to cope. Some wore bracelets with Sarah and Eli's initials. Others left notes on the dorm doors, small messages of remembrance. Professors incorporated discussions on safety, awareness, and community vigilance into their classes, hoping to transform fear into preparedness. The campus itself became a silent participant in mourning, each lecture hall, library corner, and quiet courtyard now echoing with the absence of those who had once walked freely. The investigation unearthed troubling possibilities. Experts speculated about the presence of a skilled predator with intimate knowledge of the campus layout, someone who could exploit routine, predict behaviors, and act with chilling precision. The alcove hidden behind a false wall, the cryptic symbols, and the psychological manipulations all painted a picture of a methodical, calculated crime. Yet no suspect had been identified, no fingerprints, no DNA beyond traces too small to trace. The perpetrator remained unseen, their identity as enigmatic as the night the students vanished. University authorities, while committed to enhancing security, faced difficult questions. How could such a carefully planned abduction happen in a monitored environment? Why had cameras failed to capture the critical moments? How could ordinary students, simply returning to their dorm, become victims of a meticulously orchestrated disappearance? The lack of answers bred unease, an understanding that danger sometimes lurked in the most familiar places. Despite these uncertainties, the campus slowly resumed a semblance of normality. Classes continued, students returned to dorms, wary but resilient. The memory of that night lingered like a shadow, a reminder that safety is fragile and unpredictability can strike even where one feels most secure. Security protocols were strengthened, late-night escorts introduced, and an ongoing anonymous hotline for reporting unusual activity became a lifeline. Yet the fear of the unknown, the invisible presence that had taken Sarah and Eli, never fully dissipated. Years later, their disappearance remained a defining story of the campus. Alumni spoke of it in hushed tones. New students learned to navigate dormitories with heightened awareness, and faculty recounted the events as cautionary tales. The mystery had become woven into the university's culture, a dark thread connecting generations. And yet, questions persisted. Where were Sarah and Eli now? Were they alive or gone? Had someone within the campus orchestrated it, or had an outsider exploited gaps in safety? Detectives and families alike recognized that answers might never come. The alcove behind the false wall, the notebooks, and the cryptic symbols had revealed the method but not the motive. Some questions, it seemed, were destined to remain unanswered. The final image of the campus that evening was haunting. The dorms illuminated under the moon, empty hallways stretching silently, and a lone wind rattling the fire escape doors. Life continued, but the memory of that night and the students who never returned lingered like a faint echo, a permanent scar on a once innocent place. The story of Sarah Klein and Eli Turner concluded without resolution, leaving families, students, and the community with grief, uncertainty, and the unsettling knowledge that some darkness cannot be fully illuminated. The campus learned, adapted, and mourned, but the truth of that night, the full reality of what happened, remained hidden, waiting silently in the shadows. And as the moonlight spilled across the dorm windows, the chilling realization endured. In the world's quiet corners, the inexplicable can strike without warning, and some mysteries, no matter how much we strive, are never solved.